other partners? How do we then look at the international financial architecture? How do we empower World Bank? How do we empower the IMF to do more concessional funding? How do we reorganize their governance so that those countries that did not exist, many of them in Africa, when the IMF and the World Bank were brought into being, how do we get them to have a say? How do we speak to recapitalizing these multilateral development banks? How do we improve on liquidity, the subject SDRs President Macron was talking about? How do we deal with the real issue of exaggerated risk that is destroying African governments? You know, how do we de-risk African investments? And how do we bring on board finances from the private sector? And therefore, ultimately, we came down to green industrialization is a big opportunity. Big opportunity, why? Because we have the green energy. We have the green raw materials, whether it is bauxite, whether it is steel, whether it is iron ore. We can export very many green products out of Africa, whether we are talking about bauxite, aluminium, steel, green products to Europe in terms of food products. So Africa has the potential. We have the opportunity. We have everything that we need to power our green industrialization. And that is the reason why we are very clear about what is lacking. That is climate finance. And that is why we are willing to go all the way to the launch we are going to make in this scope of a new framework, what we called in Nairobi a new global financing charter. We're going to have a global financing framework according to UAE, and we are going to have here another framework aligned, synergized, so that by next COP, we will have a new financial pact that brings on board resources. How do we collect additional resources? Is it tax? Is it carbon pricing? How do we leverage on carbon markets? How do we bring into the equation all the issues around natural carbon sinks, whether they are our forests, whether they are our peatlands, whether and majority of these are in the part of the continent we come from. So we believe that Africa can make a huge contribution with our assets if we were to agree on how financing can be obtained, and we are ready and willing to play our part, including making a contribution in the new financing framework.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Look, you listed all the assets of Africa. It is very clear there cannot be a prosperous world without a prosperous Africa. One asset I would add is leadership. Fantastic to have leaders on the continent that have that vision that you just presented to us. We made a small correction at the IMF by adding a third chair to represent Sub-Saharan Africa. Problems are not solved, but we made a small installment.
For which we are grateful.
I want to turn to Rishi Sunak. The UK took the lead on placing climate finance at the center of discussions in COP in Glasgow. And the UK has been fantastic in promoting innovations to make the financial capacity of multilateral development banks, of the IMF, go further than otherwise through guarantees and other forms of innovation. So what next? Where do you see the UK making further contributions in the financial arena? Prime Minister Sunak.
Thanks, Kristalina, and it's been good to work with you on this topic for some years now. I guess let me start by saying that I recognise the frustrations about the limits of development and climate finance. Right? If you look at it, developing countries pay 5 times more to borrow on private capital markets. Investment in renewables is growing at an extraordinary pace, but right now, I think less than 2% of that is going into Africa. Yep. And, President Ruto has argued previously, others have, that that situation is completely indefensible. And I agree. I think we would all agree with that. And that's why the $30 billion Global Climate Fund that's been announced is so welcome. It's why the Global Climate Framework is so important. And I'm pleased that the UK is supporting that. But if we want, Kristalina, as you said, this bigger, better financial system that's going to help us get the SDGs back on track, deliver all the Paris agreements, and actually reverse biodiversity loss, then I think there are probably 3 areas where we need to focus, and it overlaps a lot with Emmanuel said earlier. I think the first is we just need fresh thinking about how we do this. And that's why a while ago we pioneered the use of climate resilient debt clauses, so that climate disasters don't become economic disasters, and those should be standard across the board by 2025. They will make an enormous difference. We need reform of the financial institutions. You and I have spoken about that in the past, and we support a conditional capital increase for the World Bank, and Ajay is sitting there, because where we can stretch these balance sheets to make a difference, we should, and I know that we will.